Welcome to Sustainability Marketing Lecture 3, the social and ecological problems. As my colleague and friend Ken Petey described in the previous lecture, social and ecological problems are the starting point of sustainability marketing. In this lecture, we will discuss social and ecological problems on a macro level and then on the micro level. And finally, we will introduce to the story of stuff a very nice and entertaining DVD about the life cycle of products from cradle to grave. The learning objective for this episode is that you will understand the main social and ecological problems on the macro level. It is structured as follows. First, we will introduce to the topic, then we will show an iconic picture and introduce to the IPAD formula, and finally the implications from the IPAD formula. Some of you probably know the famous Hollywood movie, The Matrix. What is The Matrix all about? Well, it's a very nice action movie featuring Keanu Reeves. But then the underlying meaning of the movie, it is about two different worlds. It is about the artificial world of computer simulation and the real world. Similarly, marketing students and decision makers in marketing live in two different worlds. On the one hand, they live in the artificial world of advertising and brands. Often they are stuck in this world. But there's another world, the real world behind products and brands. A very nice episode in the movie The Matrix is about two pills. It's about the red pill and the blue pill. The question is, do you want to take the blue pill or the red pill? If you take the blue pill, the story ends and you can stop the video. If you take the red pill, the story goes on and you will get to know the real world behind products and brands. I'm happy that you took the red pill and we can go on with our lecture. This is the real world. Here you see the globe from outer space. It's an iconic picture which was taken in the early 1970s from outer space. What can we see? We can see a rather small planet. It is kind of fragile in the darkness, in the outer space. What else do we see? It is covered with 70% water and 30% land. And it's also limited, it's rather small. This iconic picture really changed perceptions. Actually, it made the entire discussion about the limits of growth come reality. In the 1970s, the Club of Rome released a report on the limits of growth. And a formula, the so-called IPAD formula, shows the limits of growth. The iPad hasn't got anything to do with the iPad from Apple. IPAD stands for impact equals population times affluence times technology. What does it mean? What does the equation say? Let's have a look at the different factors. Let's start with population. Population means the world population. Here you see the growth of world population during the last 2000 years. You can see that until 1800 we had less than 1 billion people on planet Earth. And then in the 19th and the 20th century we see an exponential growth from 1 billion to 7 billion people. Actually, in 2012, more than 7.5 billion live on planet Earth. So we see a high growth, especially during the last 200 years. Why is that? Well, there are a number of factors, but mainly two technologies led to this high growth. One is a technology invented in the 19th century. It is chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which led to high productivity rates in agriculture, feeding the world population. Another technology is the improvements in human medicine. These are two main factors for the high growth of world population during the last 100 years or so. Let's have a look at the second factor, affluence. That is the material consumption per capita. What does this number stand for? What do you think? Well, some might say it's the number for an emergency call. Not a bad guess. Some might guess it's the water consumption per capita or per household in countries like Germany. Not a bad guess either. But actually, this is the beer consumption per capita and year in Germany, as you can see here. What do you think? What does this number stand for? I will tell you. 2 liters is the average beer consumption per capita and year in India. What does this number stand for? What do you think? Well, this is the annual meat consumption per capita and year in Germany, as compared to 5 kilograms meat consumption in India. You can see from these numbers, well, there are differences of consumption worldwide. Obviously, some consume more and others consume less. From a global perspective, we can differentiate between 3 different categories or groups of consumption: the poor, the middle class, and the affluent, or the so-called global consumer class. The poor just live in huts or shanties. They have an insufficient diet, unsafe water. They just walk and they mainly live on local biomass like wood, for example. The middle consumer class has moderate buildings, they have enough to eat and drink, they have public transportations like buses or trains, and they live on durable materials. And then we have the affluent, the so-called global consumer class. Often they live in climate-controlled buildings, they eat a lot of meat, they eat packaged food, and they drink soft drinks. Many of them have private cars and a lot of throwaways. Roughly 1/5 of the population belongs to the poor and 1/5 to the affluent consumer class, and about 3/5 to the middle consumer class. You can see that in the following chart, that there are vast differences. Take, for example, countries like Great Britain, Italy, France, or Germany, Japan, and the USA. In these countries belonging to the OECD countries, a high share of the population belongs to the so-called global consumer class. The global consumer class earns more than $7,500 per capita and year, by definition. So they are pretty well off. And then we have other countries, developing countries, emerging countries, like China and India. Here you can see that about 15% in China and 12% in India belong to the global consumer class. So the rest of the population either belongs to the poor or the middle class. Nevertheless, if you look at the absolute numbers, which are shown in blue, you can see in the case of China and India, it's a vast number. Although just 15% of the population belongs to the global consumer class, in total, in absolute numbers, that equals 250 million people, 250 million people. Similarly, in India, around 130 million people belong to the global consumer class. This is the middle class or the entrepreneurs living well. The rest of the population is striving to reach similar lifestyles as we do. On the one hand, that's a great opportunity. It means huge emerging markets. But on the other hand, we will run into ecological problems, as you will see. Let's move on to the third factor of the IPET formula, technology. If we look at technology in the 20th century, a lot depends on oil. Think about automobiles or airplanes. They all run on oil. Or think about textiles. They are produced or derived from oil. Or think about plastics, like computers or food packaging. Everything is derived from oil. So you might say that the 20th century is the century of oil. You can see that here in the following exhibit. It shows the high growth of population in the 20th century and the growth of oil consumption. And you can clearly see that there's a positive correlation, especially in the 20th century. Some argue that we need new technologies, environmental technologies. We have to improve our energy efficiency and resource productivity by factor 4, as shown in this exhibit. You can see a certain level of energy and resource materials in 1990, and then the estimated energy consumption and resource consumption in 2050. The question is, which path will we go? If we go on with business as usual, we will see due to the world population growth, we will see a rise in energy consumption and resource consumption. But actually, if we want to stabilize the climate, we have to reduce the energy and resource consumption overall by the factor 4, as claimed by von Weizsäcker and others. Well, what does world population, the rising affluence, and technology, what does it mean? What kind of impact does it have on the natural environment? Let's have a look on the output side, especially emissions. Air emissions, especially CO2 emissions, are supposed to lead to climate change and an increasing number of disasters and hurricanes, as you can see here in the case of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Let's have a look at the input side, the resources. And we have already seen that oil is a very important resource for our consumer and industry society. Some argue that we have already reached peak oil. What does that mean? It means the maximum production of oil. Imagine all over the world there are round about 5,000 oil fields, but 200 really matter. They are responsible for 90% of the entire oil production. And each oil field follows a similar pattern. First you see a rise in oil production, and at a critical point it is stagnant and then it declines. If you add it up, you reach, or if you add it up, you will see the global oil production. That's why it's very difficult to estimate, but even the conservative International Energy Agency argues and says in 2007 that we have already reached peak oil. What does that mean? Well, there's a movie called A Rude Awakening, which shows how much we depend on oil and what will happen if we run out of oil and if we don't have a plan. It's a very interesting movie. And we can already see that due to the limited supply and the increasing demand, we also see increasing prices in oil. Until the turn of the century, the last 50 years, the oil prices were more or less between 10 and 30 US dollars per barrel. From 2000 onwards, we have a rise, a tremendous rise in oil prices, from more or less 25 US dollars up to more than 100 US dollars per barrel. So that means an increase by the factor 4. As a consequence of that, many materials also rise in prices. Take, for example, food. Here you see the positive correlation between food prices on the one hand and oil prices on the other. Why is that? Because food production very much depends on oil. Think about chemical fertilizers derived from oil. Think about agriculture. Think about transportation and production. Everything in the end of the day depends on oil. But it's not just oil, it's also another limited resource, especially soil. Fertile land is a scarce and limited resource as well. And the more population we have on planet Earth, the less we have soil per capita. And if we go on using fertile land, we will run into problems. One indicator is the phenomenon of land grabbing. What does that mean? It means that some countries go abroad and take the land, so to say, from other countries to produce food, for example, or to take their minerals. So in the future, we will see more fights about fertile land and resources. Another problem is fresh water, drinkable water. Usually that's a renewable resource. But due to human and economic activities, it turns to a non-renewable resource. The level of groundwater in many regions of the world is going down. In some areas, water is not safe anymore. So water becomes a strategic resource as well, which becomes very vulnerable and valuable. Another resource worldwide is fish from the ocean. Here you see the captured fish during the last 30 years, running from 60 million tons per year to around about 80, 90 million in 1990. Ever since, it has been stagnant. On the one hand, that's a problem. Many say that many fish resources are on the verge of extinction. On the other hand, it's also an opportunity, as you can see in the case of a red line. The red line shows the rise of aquaculture. That means fish raised in regions like Norway or Scotland or Vietnam, other parts of the world, in a reserved area, in aquacultures. Nevertheless, when we talk about captured fish, we cannot take any more fish out of the oceans, and we have to think about sustainable ways of using this resource. What does the IPET formula mean? What is the connection between the IPET formula and sustainability marketing? What kind of implications does it have? Can sustainability marketing make any contributions to reduce the impact of human beings on planet Earth? Well, when it comes to world population, no, not necessarily. When it comes to affluence, the material consumption per capita, yes, maybe sustainability marketing can change behavior. Technology, yes, definitely. Sustainability marketing can help to develop new technologies, new sustainable products and services, and introduce them to the market successfully. That's the main issue in sustainability marketing. So you can see that sustainability marketing is mainly directed at technology, partly at affluence, and it can make some contributions to reduce these factors and to reduce the impact. So we can see it has its possibilities, opportunities, but also its limitations. And this is also the first review and discussion question. What does the IPET formula say? What is the link between the IPET formula and marketing? And why is the ecological question also a social question of resource equity in a world with limited resources? Discuss. Finally, here are some references. Chapter 3 in our book, Sustainability Marketing. In addition, a very good book by Alan Durning, How Much is Enough? The Consumer Society and the Future of the World. Here he discusses the different consumer classes worldwide, the poor, the middle, and the affluent, and the rise of consumer society in the 20th century. And finally, as mentioned as well, von Weizsäcker, Lovins and their very good book on Factor 4 doubling wealth and halving resource use. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.